dive. This time we're taking a look at Deuteronomy chapter 10, verses 12 and 13. And we'll touch on verse 17 too.
Right.
We're working with some excerpts that you sent over from Don P. Baker's book, Hope.
Yes.
And these are really interesting excerpts. It's all about, like, what does God really ask of us?
Yeah.
Not just, like, the rules, but, like, what's at the heart of it all?
Absolutely. And what's really fascinating about this passage, especially the verses that you've selected, is how it kind of brings together this grand idea of God's authority, but then also very down-to-earth practical guidance for how we live our lives.
Right off the bat, verse 12 hits us with this big question.
Yeah.
What does the Lord your God ask of you? It feels very, like, conversational, right?
Right.
Not just like,
Yeah.
thou shalt not this or that. It's like a starting point for a conversation.
Yeah, it's a starting point for a relationship, not just a list of do's and don'ts. And Baker really emphasizes this in Hope, that the kind of uniqueness of the Israelite understanding of God compared to their neighbors and the other cultures at the time.
Yeah, like all the other gods that were so
Right.
unpredictable and demanding and all over the place.
Exactly. And this was a God who wanted to have a genuine bond and connection with his people.
Yes, and then it goes on to outline some key, I guess, expectations. Would you say that's a fair way to
Yeah, absolutely.
characterize that?
Yeah.
Okay, so first it says, fear the Lord your God.
Yeah.
Okay, fear. Not exactly the most enticing word, is it?
Right. It makes you think of scary movies.
Yeah, it makes me think of, like, I don't know, like Freddy Krueger.
Right, exactly.
Like, not exactly a spiritual guru.
Not exactly. But I think what we have to do is kind of think about fear maybe in a different way than we typically think of it. I mean, think about this. Think about if you were standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon, you would feel a sense of awe, right? That's powerful, maybe even a little scary, right?
Yeah.
So it's that kind of fear that we're talking about here.
Yeah.
It's recognizing something so much bigger than yourself that it inspires respect, even a bit of trembling. And Baker refers to this as reverence.
Okay.
And I think that's spot on. It's not about being paralyzed, but it's that recognition of how powerful God is that changes how you approach things.
So I'm just thinking how that plays out in my own life. Like, if I believe in a God that's that awesome and powerful, that wise,
Yeah.
it makes me think twice about making a big decision without, really consulting him first.
Absolutely. It gives you that, I guess, moral compass that you can...
Yeah, like a built-in moral compass.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really cool. And then it says, walk in obedience to him.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're getting into, like, chore territory.
Right.
Like, is obedience really just about, like, blindly following rules?
No, I think it's definitely not that. You're not supposed to just be a robot or anything like that.
Right.
And I think that what's really important to remember is that we're building on this foundation of this awe-inspiring relationship,
Okay.
So when we trust someone, when we love someone, we're more likely to follow their lead right.
Right.
We're more likely to do what they ask of us.
So it's less about do this because I said so and more about do this because I know what's best for you.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that brings us to what I think is the most beautiful part of this verse, to love him.
Okay.
It's not simply looking for our obedience.
Yeah.
God desires a relationship built on love, not just duty. This is a God who wants our hearts, not just our actions.
Right.
And Baker emphasizes how radical that is compared to the ancient world. A lot of those ancient cultures believed in gods that were more interested in appeasement than in actual love.
Yeah.
But here you have a God who's seeking this genuine connection with his people, one built on mutual love and respect. And this concept is echoed throughout Hope as a kind of foundation for understanding.
It seems like that's a major theme
Right.
in his book.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we've got reverence or awe. We've got obedience that stems from trust and love.
Right.
What's next?
Well, so think about any relationship that you cherish. It's not just about feelings, right?
Right.
You express that love through action, through how you treat the other person. And that's exactly where this verse takes us next. To serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul.
I think about this sometimes, even things that I love doing, if my heart's not really in it,
Right.
it feels like a chore.
Right, exactly.
So you got to have your heart in it.
Yeah. And, Baker actually draws this interesting parallel. In the book, he talks about how for the Israelites, their daily work, whether it was farming, raising families, all of that was seen as serving God.
Oh, wow.
They were honoring their covenant through their actions, not just in temple rituals.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so it's not just about going to church. It's about bringing that heart, that devotion into all areas of your life.
It's like a lifestyle, right?
Exactly. It is. It is a lifestyle. And recognizing the kind of spiritual significance woven through everything that you do.
Okay, cool.
And that wholeheartedness is what transforms those actions from duty into expressions of love.
Okay, so it's starting to feel a little less like a to-do list and more like just a way of life.
Right.
Which I think is really cool. But, you know, let's be honest, there are rules, right?
Of course.
There are rules. What does the text say about that?
Well, there are rules, but even here, there's this important nuance that Baker highlights.
Okay.
Verse 12 ends by saying, observe the Lord's commands and decrees.
Okay.
But then it adds this crucial phrase, for your own good.
Okay.
So it's not just, I guess, because I said so, obedience.
Right.
It's suggesting that there's this deeper reason behind it all. Baker emphasizes that for the Israelites, these commands weren't arbitrary restrictions. They were given to create a just and harmonious society. They were meant to guide them toward living in a way that brought about well-being.
It's like a guidebook for building a civilization, both on a personal and a societal level.
And societal level, yeah.
Interesting.
And he argues that even today, many moral guidelines, whether they're religious or secular, often have that same goal in mind, promoting well-being, promoting harmony.
So to summarize, I guess, in these first couple of verses that we've looked at, we've got this idea of fear as reverence.
Right.
We've got obedience that comes from trust and love.
Right.
We've got service as a heartfelt expression of that love.
Absolutely.
And then we even have rules as guidelines for a good life.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty amazing tapestry, you know, of all these different ideas coming together.
It is a beautiful tapestry.
Oh, okay.
But hold on, because verse 17 takes us in a very different direction.
Ooh, I love it. Hit me with it.
Get ready for this one. It says, for the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality and accepts no bribes.
It's pretty epic.
Right.
It's like something out of an action movie.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's more than just, I guess, dramatic language.
Yep.
It's a declaration of God's utter uniqueness.
Okay.
Especially when you consider the polytheistic beliefs that were prevalent at the time. This wasn't just about saying that the God of Israel was more powerful, but it was about establishing his distinct nature.
So it's not just power ranking.
Well,
like a king is more powerful than a knight.
Exactly.
But it's like it's a fundamentally different...
It's a different kind of entity. Yeah, and Baker dives into this in Hope, emphasizing how radical this was for the Israelites to declare their God as the God of gods, essentially saying that all other deities paled in comparison.
Yeah.
So this was a bold statement about the very essence of who God is.
It does make me think about the title of the book, Hope. Because if you're in a culture surrounded by all these other gods... Right.
To then encounter this idea of this one God who is truly supreme.
Right.
I must have been incredibly hopeful, like, wow.
It's like discovering a whole new
level
of reality.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really cool. And there's even more to unpack there, especially when we consider the rest of that verse. So stay tuned, because we're about to delve into what makes this God not only powerful, but unlike any other.
Right.
All right.
Awesome.
Looking forward to it. All right. So we just left off with that incredible declaration of God's power and uniqueness from Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 17.
Yeah.
And I'm ready to hear more about what sets this God apart.
Well, you're in for a treat, because right after describing God as this mighty, awe-inspiring being, the verse goes on to say, who shows no partiality and accepts no bribes. And this is where things get really interesting, especially for us today.
I could see that. Yeah, in our world, it feels like partiality and bribes are everywhere.
It's a sad truth, isn't it?
It is.
People with power or money seem to have all the advantages.
But this verse reminds us that God operates on a completely different level. His justice is perfect. It's incorruptible. Baker uses this really powerful image in Hope, talking about how before God, everyone stands on a level playing field. It doesn't matter who you are, what you have, or where you come from. God sees everyone equally.
That's a really powerful concept, especially in a world that often feels so unfair.
It is.
It's like a breath of fresh air, you know? Knowing that there's a higher power who judges with true impartiality.
Right, and that idea of impartiality actually connects back to something else Baker highlights.
Okay.
The idea of God's commands being for our own good.
Mm-hmm.
If God isn't playing favorites, then those guidelines that he gives us must be for the benefit of everyone, not just a select few.
It's all coming together, this picture of this awesome and powerful God who is also perfectly just and fair,
Right.
and whose instructions are designed to guide us toward a good life.
It's a pretty amazing picture, and Baker actually doesn't stop there. In Hope, he takes these concepts from Deuteronomy and explores how they can be applied to our lives today in very practical ways.
I like it. I like practical.
Right. He calls them pathways to hope.
Pathways to hope. Okay.
And I think they offer some really valuable insights for anyone seeking a more meaningful, fulfilling life.
Okay, so what are some of these pathways that he lays out?
Well, he starts with the idea of reverence, which we talked about earlier, that sense of awe and humility in the presence of God. But Baker takes it a step further, encouraging us to cultivate a sense of reverence for all of creation.
Okay.
Recognizing the sacredness in everything around us.
That makes sense.
Right.
If we believe that God created everything, then yeah, shouldn't we?
Right, exactly.
Treat it with reverence.
It's about seeing the world through this lens of wonder and gratitude, appreciating the intricate beauty of even the smallest things.
So it's not just like the big things like the Grand Canyon, even like little things.
Even the little things, yeah.
A
Absolutely.
little ant or something like.
And that kind of perspective can really shift how we approach our daily lives.
Yeah.
Leading us to make choices that are more aligned with a sense of interconnectedness and responsibility.
Okay, so reverence is the first pathway.
That's the first one.
What's next? What comes after that?
Well, flowing naturally from that sense of reverence is love.
Okay.
Specifically loving God wholeheartedly. And Baker emphasizes that this isn't just about warm, fuzzy feelings.
Right.
It's about making a conscious decision to prioritize our relationship with God,
Okay.
to seek his guidance, and to allow his love to transform us from the inside out.
You know, it's funny. I was thinking about this earlier when we were talking about obedience.
Yeah.
Like, if we love someone, we're more likely to trust their judgment and follow their lead, even if we don't always understand why.
Right, exactly.
Kind of like that with God, too, you know.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Obedience born out of love isn't about blind submission.
Right.
It's about aligning our will with a higher purpose, trusting that God's way is ultimately the best way. And that brings us to another one of Baker's pathways, service.
Oh, service. Okay, so that word sometimes makes me think of like obligation and duty.
Right.
But I have a feeling that Baker has a different take on it.
He absolutely does. Baker's big emphasis is on serving with joy.
Okay.
He argues that when we serve others out of a genuine desire to make a difference, when we tap into that love we have for God and let it flow outwards, that's when service becomes truly transformative, both for ourselves and for those we serve.
So it's not about obligation, it's about really wanting to make a difference.
It is. It's about finding those opportunities to bring light and love into the world, not out of a sense of obligation, but out of a genuine desire to make a positive impact.
That sounds a lot more fun and inspiring than, you know, just checking things off a to-do list.
It does, doesn't it? And it's not just about grand gestures or heroic acts. Baker reminds us that even the smallest acts of kindness and compassion can ripple outwards, creating a chain reaction of positive change.
It makes me think about that quote from Mother Teresa.
Oh, yeah.
Not all of us can do great things, but we can do small things with great love.
I love that quote. It perfectly captures the spirit of what Baker is trying to convey.
Yeah. And speaking of making a difference in the world, that brings us to another crucial pathway, justice.
Yes, justice.
That one feels really relevant right now, given all the injustice and inequality that we're seeing.
It's definitely a hot-button topic, and Baker doesn't shy away from the complexities of it.
Okay.
He challenges us to be active participants in the pursuit of justice and fairness, to speak out against oppression, and to advocate for those who are being marginalized.
So it's not just about being nice. It's
not just about being nice.
Actually working to change things.
It's about actively working to create a more just and equitable world for everyone.
Yeah.
And that means being willing to challenge our own biases, to confront systems of oppression, and to step outside of our comfort zones to truly make a difference.
Wow. Okay.
It's about putting our faith into action.
So really putting our money where our mouth is.
Yeah.
So to speak.
Exactly.
Okay. And then, so we have reverence, we have love, we have service, we have justice. Is there anything else?
There's one more.
Okay, hit me.
It's a big one. Trust.
Okay.
Specifically trusting God's commands,
Hmm.
even when they don't make sense to us.
Okay. I can already see how this one's going to be tricky for some people.
It's definitely a challenge.
Yeah. Especially in our modern world where we're told to question everything.
Right, exactly.
Be skeptical and
Right.
all that.
But Baker argues that there's a deeper wisdom at play here.
Okay.
He reminds us that God's laws and teachings are designed for our benefit,
Mm-hmm.
even if we don't always understand the reasoning behind them.
So it's kind of like surrendering to a higher wisdom,
It is. It's about surrendering to a higher wisdom.
even when it challenges our own understanding or preferences.
That's
It's about having faith that God knows what's best for us, even when it doesn't align with what we think we want.
beautifully put. It's about letting go of our need to control everything and allowing ourselves to be guided by something bigger than ourselves.
Wow. Okay, so we got reverence, love, service, justice, and trust. That's quite a toolkit for navigating life.
It is. It's quite a
Yeah, and
toolkit.
I'm sensing there's even more to explore here.
You're right. Baker doesn't leave us with just a neat list of principles.
Okay.
He goes deeper, asking some really thought-provoking questions about what it actually looks like to live out these pathways in a complex and often messy world.
I'm intrigued. What kind of questions does he raise? Okay, so we were talking about Baker's pathways to hope and these really practical ways to apply the ideas from Deuteronomy, but you said he goes even deeper. Like, what kinds of questions does he raise?
Well, we talked about aligning our lives with God's wisdom.
Right.
But what happens when that clashes with the world around us?
Mm-hmm.
What about those times when following God's commands means going against the grain? Maybe even challenging what our culture sees as acceptable.
Yeah, that's so relevant, especially today,
Absolutely.
when there's so much pressure to just go along with what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, yeah. Baker really doesn't shy away from this tension.
Mm-hmm.
He actually points out that throughout history, those who've truly lived out their faith
Yeah.
have often been the ones who've dared to be different, who stood up for what they believe in, even when it was unpopular or even dangerous.
So it's not just about being good, in a conventional sense.
Right.
It's about really having that courage to follow God's path, even when it leads us into, uncharted territory.
Exactly. And Baker uses some really powerful examples in Hope.
Okay.
He talks about figures like Moses challenging the might of the Egyptian pharaoh,
Right.
the prophets speaking truth to power even when their messages were met with resistance.
Mm.
He even talks about Jesus, who ultimately gave his life for what he believed in.
Wow. Those are some pretty high standards.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm ready to part the Red Sea just yet, but...
Right. Well, the point isn't necessarily to replicate those exact actions,
Right.
but to understand the spirit behind them, that willingness to stand firm in our convictions,
Mm-hmm.
even when it's difficult.
Because we believe in something bigger than ourselves.
Exactly.
Okay, but how do we even know, what God wants us to do in those tricky situations?
Yes.
How do we discern his will when we're faced with those really tough choices?
It's a question for the ages, isn't it?
It is.
And honestly, there's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Right.
But Baker does offer some really helpful guidance and hope.
Okay.
He talks about the importance of prayer, of seeking God's guidance through Scripture, and of listening to that still small voice within.
Okay.
He even emphasizes the value of wise counsel,
Mm-hmm.
seeking advice from others who share our faith.
So it's like that open communication with God, but also being part of a community
It is. Isn't it?
where we can support and learn from each other.
Absolutely. And Baker adds another really important element to the mix, grace.
Okay.
Because let's be real, we're not going to get it right all the time.
No.
We're going to mess up, we're going to make mistakes, and we're even going to stray from the path.
We're human.
We are human, but those slip-ups don't have to define us.
That's good to hear.
Right. He constantly emphasizes that God's grace, his willingness to forgive and restore us, even when we fall short.
It's not about beating ourselves up. It's about
It's not about beating ourselves up.
learning and moving forward.
It's about learning and moving forward. Absolutely.
Okay, so it's not about achieving some kind of spiritual perfection.
Yeah.
It's more about a journey of striving and having that faith that even when we mess up, we've got his grace
Exactly.
to fall back on.
Beautifully said. And, that brings us full circle back to that question from verse 12.
Mm-hmm.
What does the Lord your God ask of you?
Right.
It's not about a list of rules. It's about cultivating this relationship built on reverence, love, and trust. It's about serving others with joy and pursuing justice and fairness in a world that desperately needs it.
Yeah.
It's about remembering that God is a God of hope who offers us guidance and support as we navigate the complexities of life.
It's really beautiful.
It is, it is. And I think Baker leads us with this really powerful challenge in hope.
Okay.
He reminds us that aligning our lives with God's will isn't this passive process. It requires us to be active participants, to make conscious choices, and to step out in faith, even when we're not sure where the path may lead.
That really resonates with me. It's so easy to just stay in our comfort zones
It is.
and just avoid taking risks. But if we really believe in this God who's calling us to something more,
Right.
then yeah, maybe we need to be a little bolder and a little more courageous.
I love that. A little bolder, a little more courageous.
Yeah.
That's such a great takeaway. And, as we wrap up this deep dive into Deuteronomy chapter 10, I hope that's what you'll carry with you. That sense of courage, that willingness to step out in faith.
Yeah.
And embrace the adventure of walking with God, even when the path is uncertain.
I think that's the perfect note to end on. This has been such a rich and thought-provoking conversation, so thank you for joining me on this deep dive.
It's been my pleasure. And to our listener, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking that deeper understanding. There's always more to discover on this incredible journey of faith.